All right, guys, welcome back to Seneca's Letters to Lucilius. We are on Seneca's letter 63 today, and this is on grief for lost friends. So we'll just begin here. He says, "I am grieved to hear that your friend Flaccus is dead, but I would not have you sorrow more than is fitting. That you should not mourn at all, I should hardly dare to insist, and yet I know that is the better way." So right off the bat here, he is saying that pretty clearly that it is better if you did not mourn for someone who has passed, which is, I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with Stoic philosophy, and they're like, oh, wow, that means you don't care. It doesn't mean that you don't care. It means that you are accepting of life and accepting of things. And as we'll see in this letter, he goes on to talk about why we kind of sorrow and over sorrow. And it is somewhat of a selfish motive, but let's move on here. Okay, he says here, "But what man will ever be so blessed with the ideal steadfastness of soul, unless he has already risen far above the reach of fortune?" So he's basically saying, yeah, so it's an ideal. You're not really going to be that, but even such a man will be stung by an event like this, but it will only be a sting. So even if you were that kind of Stoic ideal, you would still feel a sting, but it would still only be a sting. Okay, so he says, "We, however, may be forgiven for bursting into tears, if only our tears have not flowed to excess and we have checked them by our own efforts." So he's saying two things. One is that your tears should not be too excessive, okay, on a loss. And the second thing is that you have actually checked them yourself. You have stopped yourself. This is the key thing here, all right? And he says here, "Let not the eyes be dry when you have lost a friend, nor let them overflow. We may weep, but we must not wail." So he's saying it's okay. It's all right. It's okay if you cry, but don't take it to the excess, right? And some people might interpret this as him saying that, yeah, no, you should cry. He actually already said, no, you shouldn't, but that's the ideal. However, being human, being where you are, this is fine, right? Now, he goes on to say in verse 2, "Do you think that the law which I lay down for you is harsh, when the greatest of Greek poets has extended the privilege of weeping for one day only?" And in the lines where he tells us that even Niobe took thought of food. So what he's talking about here is the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, and he's talking about in this that he tells that basically there's two scenes he's talking about. One of them is where Achilles is told to only mourn for one day. That's it, after suffering some major losses. Okay. And then the second one is about Niobe, who, as a punishment, her 12 children were slain, and she fasted for 9 days, but on the 10th day she ate. And so she was even thinking of food. So he's saying that, that even in these situations, right? It's difficult. It's difficult. Like even Niobe was tempted by food, right? Even after this massive loss, right? So he says here, "Do you wish to know the reasons for lamentations and excessive weeping?" Right? Why? Okay, it's because we seek the proofs of our bereavement in our tears and do not give way to sorrow, but merely parade it. So he's saying the reason why you're crying, why you're getting so upset about a loss, is for show. He's saying that it's not your actual sadness in many cases. It is that you are trying to show how sad you are, right? And he goes on to say here that no man goes into mourning for his own sake. Shame on our ill-timed folly. There is an element of self-seeking even in our sorrow. So even when we're sad, a lot of times we're putting on a show for people just to show how sorry we are. The tears are actually showing us that we're sad. We're using that as proof to show that we're a good person, we care, which he's saying is not really a very good motive, right? "What, you say, am I to forget my friend? Well, it's surely a short-lived memory that you vouchsafe to him, if it is to endure only as long as your grief." Okay, so he's saying that if you're saying that you only remember your friend while you're grieving, that's not going to be a very long time. That's not a good justification for grieving like that. So he says, "Presently, that brow of yours will be smoothed out in laughter by some circumstance, however casual." So pretty soon you're going to be laughing. Okay, it is to a time no more distant than that I put off the soothing of every regret, the quieting of even the bitterest grief. So he's saying no matter how bad the sorrow is, trust me, it's going to go away. All right. And he says that as soon as you cease to observe yourself, the picture of sorrow which you have contemplated will fade away. At present, you're keeping watch over your own suffering. All right. But even while you keep watch, it slips away from you, and the sharper it is, the more speedily it comes to an end. So he's saying that the reason why you're so sad and you're mourning so much is because you're trying to. You're keeping watch over it. You're saying, I have to be sad right now. And he's saying that pretty soon you won't even be able to stop yourself. It's just going to slip away on its own. So he's saying that your motives are not as pure as what you think they are. Okay? Let us see to it that the recollection of those whom we have lost becomes a pleasant memory to us. No man reverts with pleasure to any subject which he will not be able to reflect upon without pain. All right. So a couple things here. So first of all, before we get into this, what he said before, it's not to say that you're not sorry when someone passes or that there's no element of sadness to it at all. But he's saying that a lot of it is manufactured and it is for show and to make you feel better about being a better person. Okay. But he says here, okay, you want to make sure that the recollection of whom we've lost becomes a pleasant memory to us. Okay. And he's saying that no man reverts with pleasure to any subject which he will not be able to reflect upon without pain. So what does this mean? No man reverts with pleasure to any subject, okay, which you will not be able to reflect upon without pain. So no one goes to pleasure, has pleasure, okay, in a subject that he will not be able to reflect upon without pain. If he's not able to reflect upon it without pain, then he can't have pleasure from it. So the key is to take the pain out, okay? It's a long way of saying that. So, 2, it cannot but be that the names of those whom we have loved and lost come back to us with a sort of sting, but there is a pleasure even in the sting. Okay, so it's kind of weird. He's kind of describing this thing that, when you lose someone, there's almost this pleasure in this pain, right? This deep pain. It's almost like feeling you're alive, right? Because in feeling that pain, there's this pleasure in it, right? There's this, and that's why we kind of go to the sadness sometimes, is because we get some kind of pleasure out of feeling sorrow. It's why we listen to sad songs. It's interesting. Like, that's a very interesting thing. In verse 5, he says, "For my friend Attalus used to say, the remembrance of lost friends is pleasant in the same way that certain fruits have an agreeably acid taste, or as in extremely old wines, it is their very bitterness that pleases us." So he's saying there that essentially there is this kind of weird pain that kind of, is something that's sour. Why do we like something that's sour, or something that's bitter? Right? It is that. There's something about that is attractive to us. Okay. Indeed, after a certain lapse of time, every thought that gave pain is quenched, and the pleasure comes to us unalloyed. So what he's saying is that in time, we lose the pain part and we just have the pleasure part, which is a good thing, right? That means that over time, you stop feeling the pain of the loss, but you start to keep the pleasure of that person, that memory, right? If we take the word of Attalus for it, to think of friends who are alive and well is like enjoying a meal of cakes and honey. The recollection of friends who have passed away gives a pleasure that is not without a touch of bitterness. Yet who will deny that even these things, which are bitter and contain an element of sourness, do not serve to arouse the stomach? Okay. So again, he's really just saying here that there is, the friends that you have, it's like a meal of cakes and honey. It's all sweet, okay? But the recollection of the ones who have passed, it's a pleasure, but there is that touch of bitterness in it, right? There's that sourness, but you still crave it. You still want that. There's something about that is part of humanity. In verse 7, he says, "For my part, I do not agree with him. To me, the thought of my dead friends is sweet and appealing, for I have had them as if I should one day lose them. I have lost them as if I have them still." So this is what Seneca's saying. He's saying, actually, I kind of disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. Again, and Seneca's talking about an ideal an ideal here, right? He's saying the thought of my dead friends is just sweet and appealing. There's no bitterness in there. And the reason why he's saying, for I have had them as if I should one day lose them. So he's saying that the reason why is because when they were his friends, he knew that he was going to lose them. You know, just like if you went on vacation, you know that you're going back home. You're not going to be mourning having to, I mean, you might not be happy about having to go back home, but you know that this is part of the process. You didn't sign up to go there forever. Okay. And he says, I have lost them as if I have them still. So then when he does lose them, he acts as if he has them. He does not allow that to get to him. All right. Therefore, Lucilius, act as befits your own serenity of mind and cease to put a wrong interpretation on the gifts of fortune. Fortune has taken away, but fortune has given. So he's saying, you know, again, what do we do as Stoics? Okay. We don't misinterpret fortune. Fortune, sure, it's taken away, but it's also given. So, you know, you had the friend, right? It's just like borrowing something, like borrowing a book from the library, right? It's not yours permanently. And so is everything in life. And so it's taken away, it's given. Okay. In verse 8, he says, let us greedily enjoy our friends because we do not know how long this privilege will be ours. Let us think how often we shall leave them when we go upon distant journeys, and how often we shall fail to see them when we tarry together in the same place. We shall thus understand that we have lost too much of their time while they were alive. So what he's saying here is that, look, when you have friends, enjoy them while they're here, because you don't know how long they're going to be here, and that applies to everyone, relationships in your life. Okay? And so stop taking people for granted. Okay? How often do you fail to see people who are right there? And then when they're gone, then you're gonna see them. Then you're gonna see what you've missed out on. But will you tolerate men who are most careless of their friends and then mourn them most abjectly and do not love anyone unless they have lost him? The reason why they lament too unrestrainedly at such times is that they are afraid lest men doubt whether they really have loved. All too late, they seek for proofs of their emotions. So again, he's saying, you know, are you going to really respect a person who didn't treat their friends very well, who wasn't very appreciative of their friends when they had them, but then, you know, they are so sad and lament them so much because they're afraid that other people will not believe that they actually really love them, that they actually really cared? Are they trying to show that they care, but they didn't show that they care when their friend was alive? In verse 10, he says, if we have other friends, we surely deserve ill at their hands and think ill of them, if they are so little account that they fail to console us for the loss of one. If, on the other hand, we have no other friends, we have injured ourselves more than fortune has injured us, since fortune has robbed us of one friend, but we have robbed ourselves of every friend whom we have failed to make. So his argument here is this. He's saying that, look, if you're so upset, okay, that having all these other friends does not make up for this friend that you lost, then you must not really care that much about these other friends. They must not mean that much to you, okay? And if it's true that you don't have other friends and you've lost your only friend, then hey, you've done worse than fortune could do for yourself, that could do to you, okay? Because you've robbed yourself of every friend that you failed to make. You haven't made friends. You've made that choice. In verse 11, he says, again, he who has been unable to love more than one has had none too much love even for that one. So he's saying that if you don't have more than one friend, if you haven't, then you probably don't even have that much love for that one friend. If a man who has lost his one and only tunic through robbery chooses to bewail his plight rather than look about him for some way to escape the cold or for something which to cover his shoulders, would you not think him an utter fool? You have buried one whom you loved. Look about for someone to love. It is better to replace your friend than to weep for him. So he's saying here that, look, instead of being so upset because you lost a friend, go and look for another friend. It's not a betrayal. It's just a sensible thing to do. If you lost your shirt and you're cold, you'd go and look for another shirt or something to wear so that you wouldn't feel cold. And that makes perfect sense. He said that's better than wailing for a loss, friend. What am I? In 12, he says, what I am about to add is, I know, a very hacking remark, but I shall not omit it simply because it is a common phrase. A man ends his grief by the mere passing of time, even if he has not ended it of his own accord. But the most shameful cure for sorrow, in the case of a sensible man, is to grow weary of sorrowing. I should prefer you abandon grief rather than have grief abandon you, and you should stop grieving as soon as possible, since even if you wish to do so, it is impossible to keep it up for a long time. So he's saying, look, stop this nonsense. Stop grieving you need to stop it. You need to stop it. Don't drag it out until you can't even be sad anymore, right? You know, how many times you listen to a sad song and you're like, and it doesn't even make you sad anymore, and you're just trying to be sad. Stop it. Stop it. It's silly. Why are you doing this? Stop. Okay? Our forefathers have enacted that, in the case of women, a year should be the limit for mourning. Not that they need mourn for so long, but that they should mourn no longer. In the case of men, no rules are laid down, because to mourn at all is not regarded as honorable. For all that, what woman can you show me of all the pathetic females that could scarcely be dragged away from the funeral pile or torn from the corpse, whose tears have lasted a whole month? Nothing becomes offensive so quickly as grief. When fresh, it finds someone to console and attracts one another to itself, but after becoming chronic, it is ridiculed, and rightly, for it is either assumed or foolish. So what he's saying here is, he's saying, okay, in the Roman times, and at that time in the law, a woman whose husband had passed, she had a year to grieve before she could be remarried, actually. Okay, but she didn't need to grieve for that whole year. Okay, that was just the law. Like, that time was given. Okay, for a man, there was no time, because it's not honorable. It never was considered honorable for a man to be grieving. But he's saying, look, of all these women that are like, oh, I'm so sad, whatever. Okay, show me one who actually grieved for a whole month, whose tears actually lasted a month. Okay, doesn't exist. They are over it. Okay. Because he says nothing becomes offensive so quickly as grief. Okay. So when you keep on grieving and you're just constantly in the state of grieving, it gets old. People get tired of it. They get sick of it. They can tell that it's just a show, because he says it's either assumed or foolish. You're either just an idiot, like, why are you continuing grieving, or you're just doing this for show. Stop it. All right. In verse 14, he says, he who writes these words to you is no other than I, who wept so excessively for my dear friend Aeneas Serenus, in that, in spite of my wishes, I must be included among the examples of men who have been overcome by grief. Today, however, I condemn this act of mine, and I understand that the reason why I lamented so greatly was chiefly that I had never imagined it possible for his death to precede mine. The only thought which occurred to my mind was that he was younger, and much younger too, as if the fates kept to the order of our ages. So Seneca here is admitting he was one of these people that grieved too much. Okay, he did this himself. All right, and so that wasn't good. And he kind of condemns that behavior now, but he did do it, and and he's saying that it was, if anything, if I can make an excuse for it, it's because he was way younger. It shocked me. I didn't expect that at all. Okay, in verse 15, he says, "Therefore, let us continually think as much about our own mortality as about that of all those we love. In former days, I ought to have said, my friend Serenus is younger than I, but what does that matter? He would naturally die after me, but he may precede me. It was just because I did not do this that I was unprepared when fortune dealt me the sudden blow. Now is the time for to reflect, not only that all things are mortal, but also that their mortality is subject to no fixed law. Whatever can happen at any time can happen today." So some good wisdom here, right? He's saying that you should be thinking about your own mortality, okay? And as about that of all those you love, okay? And he was saying that, he thought that just because Serenus is younger that he would die after him, but fortune doesn't care about that, okay? So he was unprepared for the blow of fortune, okay? And so what he's saying is that now it's time to reflect, not only on all things that are mortal, but also that their mortality is subject to no fixed law. What can happen anytime, any anytime can happen today. So this is important to think about, right? In terms of a lot of things, right? So one of the major points here is that the reason why fortune smacks you upside the head is because you're not prepared for it. And so it's better for you to start thinking about that anything could happen and accept all the things that could happen, right? What is it that would shock you the most right now? It could happen. It could happen. And if you accept that, then if it does happen, you won't be as shocked. It won't cause you to be as shaken or as taken off base, right? So it's really important that we, as Stoics, we consider all the possibilities, all the things that could happen, and we see them as a reality. We don't deny that reality, right? In verse 16, he wraps it up by saying, "Let us therefore reflect, my beloved Lucilius, that we shall soon come to the goal which this friend to our own sorrow has reached. And perhaps, if only the tale told by wise men is true, and there is a bourne to welcome us, then he whom we think we have lost has only been sent on ahead. Farewell." So he gives a little bit of consolement here, saying that, look, here's the thing, okay? You're eventually going to reach this. You're eventually going to die as well, okay? And perhaps, he's only lost to us, but he's been sent on ahead, and we'll see our friend someday. That's what he says there. So maybe it's true, maybe it's not. It's something to think about. But yeah, this letter in general, I think is a good one. It's a hard teaching. It's hard to deal with loss, but if you really think about it, if you really look and see when you are dealing with loss, I think you'll find two things. One is that you're making the choice to stay in the sorrow. We do this. Sometimes we do it because we like the bittersweet pain of it. Sometimes we do it to show that we actually care, even though we know we don't care as much, and we're making a show of it because we feel like we need to. And then the other thing that happens here is that we're unprepared for these things, right? The reason why these things hit you so dramatically is because you're unprepared. Like you need to be prepared for anything to happen in life. And by prepared for it, I don't mean that you're ready to handle the situation. What I mean is that you believe it is a possibility and you're willing to accept that ahead of time. And the more that you accept things in life, they accept the things that are, accept the things that may be, and accept the things that have been, the more at peace you will be. Till the next time.